I'm Christina Wong. I'm the granddaughter of immigrants from southern China. Most people know me from my comedy and my many one woman shows, the last of which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Drama. And while I've gotten into my fair share of good trouble, I've never been incarcerated. But my co host, Kirn Kim, has. Kirn is Korean American and the son of immigrants. I met Kern's notoriety long before I met him in person. I was familiar with his case because of a 2002 landmark Asian American movie called Better Luck Tomorrow about honor roll students who get caught up in the murder of one of their classmates. While filmmaker Justin Lin says the movie was fictional, many were quick to point out the parallels between those characters and the Sunny Hills murder, or the honor roll killing in 1992. What the movie doesn't show, and what we often never see with the criminal justice system, is how shameful incarceration is for family members, how Asian Americans navigate prison, and what it's like when those who are incarcerated return to society. So I thought the best way to explore those topics and more would be through a podcast. In this podcast, we'll look at what the experience of Asian Pacific Islander Americans in prison is and the specific issues they face when they leave prison and become returning citizens. On this teaser episode, you'll hear Kern and I comparing notes on how we were raised. We were brought up in two different parts of California, but the pressure cooker of our existence was so similar. So similar, in fact, that much of what we initially thought about prison, and specifically the Asian American relationship with prisons, was the same. Welcome to Killing Your Number. So, Kern, how much of a stereotype were you when you were growing up?
Well, let's see. I was an honor student, National Honor Society, piano player, martial artist, computer nerd.
That sounds like an Asian parent's wet dream. How much was guilt a part of your upbringing?
Oh, absolutely a ton. I mean, come on. It's that book about the tiger mom, you know.
So you're referring to Amy Chua's book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, which was sort of about the relentlessness of Asian parenting. Amy Chua's book put this archetype out in the world of an Asian mother and what Asian parenting looks like and the pressure cooker that Asian American kids are under to succeed.
My mom was very much a force to be reckoned with in terms of making sure that I was in the high achievement bracket. Anything less than an A was absolutely unacceptable. If I got an A, I was asked why I didn't get an A plus. If I got 100%, I was asked why I didn't get extra credit. It was always kind of a guilty feeling when I came home with something less than an A. The embarrassment factor in my family also played a role in that my father was a high profile member of the Orange County, California Korean community.
Oh, yeah. So your father was a high profile person? In what way?
So we moved to Fullerton, California back when there were no Koreans there. And if you know the area today, there are a ton of Koreans in Fullerton. And my father was the very first Korean general practice doctor in the Fullerton area. So if you grew up in the North Orange County area, Fullerton, Anaheim, Buena Park, and you were Korean, chances are my father was your doctor.
So what was that like for you growing up?
It was rough. The pressure that my mom put on me was always, do you understand who your father is in this community? Every time I made a mistake, my mom would tell me it reflected poorly on my father, and my high achievement gap was kind of expected being the doctor's son.
Being Korean sounds a lot like being Chinese. I grew up in San Francisco, and it was a complete pressure cooker in terms of what success was supposed to look like, how you weren't supposed to embarrass your family, and potentially everything could embarrass your family, which made it so confusing because what didn't embarrass your family? I kind of found my release in getting into trouble at school while keeping up really good grades. I got 5 detentions in one sitting because I signed a Catholic mass banner at my school with I basically said I was grateful for my beautiful ass. and got into so much trouble, yet they didn't call my folks.
I was not as rambunctious as you. I did get into a little trouble in terms of getting into fights, but it was a weird thing in Fullerton. It wasn't about were you willing to stand up for yourself. It was all about win-loss record. And so I was one of the few small guys who was actually willing to fight back. So I got into a lot of fights in elementary school, but that changed when I got to junior high and puberty kicked in, and suddenly I had a growth spurt. So now I'm one of the taller Asians in my generation.
Aside from the growth spurt in middle school, we get to you in high school. What are the things you're doing to cope with that pressure?
I think my struggle was that I could not find a release to cope with the pressure. And because of the fact that I was this nerdy kid interested in technology back in the 80s and 90s when it wasn't cool to be interested in technology, I faced a lot of social rejection, which then led to me hanging around with people who I shouldn't have been around. And then my life trajectory was severely altered. We found ourselves in a situation where, unfortunately, a boy was killed, and then I was sentenced as an adult to life in prison for murder.
Wow. So that's, I have to acknowledge this is a huge tragedy for the victim, Stuart Tay, his family, his community, and this whole moment marks just a complete shift for an entire community, for you and your co-defendants as well. So you're still who you are, right? This nerdy kid in high school. You're still in high school when this is happening. And now you suddenly find yourself international baccalaureate student in youth authority. What is that like to go from just being this model minority high achievement kid in high school to suddenly you are living in a facility for what might seem like will be the rest of your life, or and trying to navigate that?
Um, Obviously, it wasn't easy. Having been who I was growing up didn't prepare me at all for the life inside of prison, because most of the people in there lived a very stereotypical, hard upbringing in terms of having a lack of resources, dealing with systemic racism far more than I had as an Asian person.
So you grew up in Fullerton under this pressure to not bring shame upon your father, to probably go to an Ivy League school, and suddenly you are now sentenced to life in prison. I have so many questions about how you navigated at that time, how you who you found, who your people were when you got there, um, how how you how your family dealt with it. There's just so many places to go.
Um, um, because of the fact that my father was a um, high ranking member of the Korean community, and because of the fact that a number of the people arrested were honor students,
Hmm.
the case was very high profile. So there was no hiding the fact that I was incarcerated. For the most part, in the Asian community, once a member of the family is arrested, the community tends to shun this person and deny they ever existed. They are spoken of as if they
Mm-hmm.
chose to disappear or just di- went off to school in another country.
Yeah.
But because of the shame that comes with being involved in the justice system.
Yeah.
However, in my case, there was no hiding from it. So My parents had to deal with it head on. And also for me, even inside, other Asians were like, whoa, you're in for that case.
You were notorious.
Yes. Even when I came home, people who grew up being told that
Mm,
I was the, for lack of a better term, Asian boogeyman.
mm,
Lots of people grew up being told, do you want to end up like that doctor's son who went to prison? Quit
mm,
acting out, or else you're going to do that. And so I face this pressure out here in terms of rejection because of the fact that I was not part of the model minority at this point,
mhm.
because I was the person who everyone strived not to be.
So I met you at an API Rise meeting. API Rise, the whole acronym, say it for me. It's Asian Pacific Islander.
Asian Pacific Islander Reentry and Inclusion through Support and Empowerment.
Yeah. So I have never been incarcerated. As I've said before, I have served a lot of detention time in high school, but I found myself at one of these meetings at the invite of Paul Jung, who had started this organization because his brother Ben was a juvenile lifer coming out. I guess when Ben and you were both in prison, there were meetings of Korean parents who had kids who were incarcerated, and sort of from that support system grew this need to have something like API Rise, because folks were coming out of prison after having spent more of their life inside than outside, and there wasn't really support systems for Asian Pacific Islanders coming out of prison. And so I was at a meeting, and that's I had been going to meetings, just listening, and that's when I met skinny little Kern. A pseudo celebrity. I mean, I will say it was really eerie to meet you for the first time and have experienced your case through both what news media had come out at the time. And I didn't follow the case that closely, but I more learned about it through the movie Better Luck Tomorrow, which is a very fictitious retelling of that story. So it was this very strange and yet Hollywood moment to meet you and go, that's the guy from the case? The one that was played by a much more attractive Perry Shen?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
What else was your first impression of me?
I think I met you were like standing against a doorway. You look like I could just kind of push you over. You're like, I think you weigh like 90 pounds, Kern, and you've no muscles and no tattoos.
Thank you.
Unlike this guy went to prison. It must be for some white collar crime. It's clearly maybe it's like some bounce checks or something. Like this is not. And then I think I googled you that night and my jaw hit the floor because I was like, oh my god, the guy from the movie based on that case has served time and now is out and just hanging out with us on the outside. I think what was also kind of peculiar when I first met you, you actually weren't at a meeting. You were on a phone call, a support call for Sunny Wong, and you identified yourself as a jailbird lawyer, which I'd never heard this term before, but I
Jailhouse
guess
lawyer.
jailhouse lawyer. And I was like, holy shit, whoever this guy is, it's like he has 12 law degrees. I remember all of us at this meeting who had never been to prison, we were just like, sort of threw our hands up. Like, I don't think we're anywhere near as useful as Kern. And then just listening to everyone else who was at that meeting who had been in prison, like you all knew the legal system so well. And so it was sort of this fascination I had. I was like, wow, Kern is like a prison nerd. And Kern somehow navigated 20 years in prison. He has no tattoos, no muscles, somehow was in prison for 20 years, didn't do a single push-up. And somehow, didn't get shanked. I was just so curious about this. And especially because you'd spent most of your adult life and the last of your teen years incarcerated, how you survived that. And like my family was horrified when I got my nose pierced. That is nothing close to serving 20 years in prison for a high profile case, right? So basically, Kern, you're here to help me understand how how to help your parents move through shame.
Life in prison was very rough. How I managed to survive it is a very long story. And I think that's why we are doing this podcast, in order to describe not just my experience, but also just the
Hmm.
experience of Asians in general in prison, because of the fact that our community is not very welcoming of people who don't fit the model minority myth, especially those who were impacted by the justice system.
And I think
And
what a lot of folks don't even realize is that Asian Americans go to prison. We're a small part of the population there, but rapidly growing, and there's a whole there's a whole host of specific issues that specifically affect Asian Americans inside the justice system.
yeah, and because of the fact that the model minority myth was formed, so many Asians who come to this country want to integrate into American society, to be fully welcomed into this melting pot of a country, because of the fact that they were rejected at home. They did not have
Hmm.
opportunity because they did not have the proper birthright or the proper connections.
Mm-hmm.
But with so much of the Asian community wanting integration, wanting to become fully immersed in the American experience, they don't also realize that mass incarceration is part of the American experience.
Nothing is more American than prisons and our prison system.
Exactly. And what makes the Asian community so special that they feel like mass incarceration is not going to impact their community?
Hmm.
But yet, because of the fact that the Asian community stays silent on issues of shame, what makes the Asian community feel like they're so special that this won't impact them?
Yeah. Yeah, what I'm looking forward to talking about is everything from having an ice hold where they came here to America when they were babies and now they are at risk of being deported to a country they don't know when they're done serving their prison sentence, to navigating prison when you don't speak English. Because as it turns out, there's no translation. There's not or at least there's not consistent access to any kind of translation support. And some of the folks we know have learned English inside the prison system. Just the day to day of maintaining hope and maintaining your culture while inside.
And we'll also talk about the struggles with reintegrating back in society. Recently in California, where we're based, there has been a huge change in supporting people who are reentering society, um, simply because of the fact that our prison system grew so large that the public was no longer willing to fund it. Um, as much as there are points of failure in people integrating back to society because of the systems that are in place, we also have a huge point of failure within the Asian community because of the shame that our
Mm,
community places upon those who are justice impacted, and the issues that they face in their reintegration in terms of not being able to cope with the stress of reentry, being told to not discuss it, not seek help. I mean, this is a mental health issue, and
mhm.
unfortunately, mental health is also one of the factors of shame that the Asian community refuses to recognize.
You imagine my parents are so easily embarrassed that I didn't get into Lowell High School in San Francisco. I can't imagine what that looks like when you have to explain where your kid went for 20 plus years.
My parents were part of a Korean family support group comprised mostly of parents of kids who were incarcerated, sentenced to life in prison as adults. I was one of the first to come home. I managed to come home prior to the passage of a lot of the reforms that had occurred in California. And therefore, I was a part of a lot of these reforms that took place, informing the public about the need for these issues. However, because of the fact that the API community was not open to hearing the issue of API incarceration, my work really focused on the population at large and supporting that group. But it wasn't until more Asian Pacific Islander members of the community were released that
Mhm.
an organization like API Rise had viability. The vast majority of Asian Pacific Islanders who are incarcerated got locked up at a young age.
Mm.
And therefore, they were all beneficiaries of the reforms that took place down the line. And so once these reforms were passed, we saw a huge acceleration in the number of API who earned release.
So API Rise is about 10 years old and has grown from initially when I went, they were just support meetings that happened in a room in a church. And now we've got full-time staff, prison in reach. We're working on advocacy issues, and we're welcoming a lot of folks back home and helping them adjust to life on the outside and helping them feel welcome and that this is your home. Prison is not where we want you to go back to, but this is home.
Absolutely. And you find much more comfort around people with whom you have a shared experience. And of course, the cultural issues that come with being API in any space is hard, especially when you deal with issues like the language barrier, when you deal with specific issues like immigration to a certain country and deportation. It's doing the work in that lens that we are doing this podcast to let the public understand that there are APIs who go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
There are factors of shame that are very much buried within our community, and topics that we want to bring to light, not just out of curiosity, but out of information and education.
And what I found is in doing this work that there's a lot of folks in the woodwork who have incarcerated relatives or people in their community who are incarcerated and they just haven't talked about it. And so this has been sort of this window to let folks know, yes, it's awful. Of course, it's shame inducing, but there's also community to welcome you and help you get adjusted as you come back into society.
There are high profile members of the community who have relatives who are incarcerated. And because of shame, they don't want to talk about that, even though their voices could be crucial in terms of bringing awareness and social acceptance of the justice impacted community. But because of the cultural shame, they refuse to acknowledge it. And unfortunately, as people know when they go through therapy, when you take a stress and you refuse to acknowledge it, it's allowed to grow and fester internally. And eventually it causes problems.
It's that passive aggressive Asian thing. I think Asian Americans have this reputation of being really passive aggressive, like out of nowhere, like this explosion, because we're so used to like not showing all the stuff we take in, and then we just sort of barf on everybody emotionally. And anyway, we're hopefully going to shift that culture so that we barf in little bits, in productive little bits, and let people and be in communication with people. Hey, that sucks. Can we work on something together?
Yeah. And we're not going to only discuss depressing topics. We will definitely touch on some of the more lighthearted aspects of life in prison in terms of how to keep your spirits up and how we survived, how we maintained a sense of community and maintained a sense of
and culture,
cultural self, cultural, how we maintained a sense of cultural identity.
And I definitely plan to roast Kirn and goad him more and more into revealing his personal life, such as how does dating work when you come out of prison? What are the rumors that you were confronted with about your existence while you were away? Why is it Kirn didn't do a single push-up in those 20 years in prison? So that's a little taste of Killing Your Number. As you can see, we're not really a true crime podcast, more like a post-crime podcast. We're not going to look at what got our guests into prison, but we will look at how the carceral system affects Asian Americans, a population that most people don't even think of being in prison in the first place. In future episodes, you can expect us to talk to other formerly incarcerated Asian Americans about what their experiences have been like in the Asian car in prison. We'll explain what the Asian car is. We will talk about what those first moments of lockup felt like and the first moments of freedom. Some of our guests still aren't quite free and are fighting deportations to countries they fled when they were very little. And of course, we'll try to talk about what dating is like after lockup. Some of our guests got married in prison. Some started dating their current loves while inside. Oh, and you can fully expect me to goad Kirn into telling us about how that weird emasculation of Asian men thing butts up against the stigma of incarceration when you're trying to date for the first time in your adult life. This podcast was produced in partnership with API Rise. You can learn more about our work in supporting system-impacted Asian Pacific Islanders at api-rise.org. Thanks for listening.
All we got